Tonight I'm going to use a torch and a plastic tube for some cool light painting effects to help recreate those classic 1980s portraits. Light painting is a great way into long exposure photography and offers up a world where we can control light and shape it to suit our shots. Usually we use a powerful torch at night to visually paint a scene with light. However, in this project we're going to place a torch in a plastic tube and cover it with translucent paper to create a light wand to paint with. We've roped in a friend here to help us do the light painting for us, so we can concentrate on composing, exposing, focusing and firing our Canon camera. We've ensured he's dressed in black, light-absorbing clothes so he doesn't show up in the shots. The torch we're using also has a flashing effect built in, so we're using this to our advantage to mimic a 1980s film-style effect. Think of films like Tron and Miami Vice, where the sleek neon colours are both retro and futuristic in appearance. With our model kitted out like he's Don Johnson from Miami Vice, we're going to use the light wand to create these brilliant effects in camera and then polish off the colours in Photoshop afterwards. First up, you need something to paint with. For this project, you'll need to buy a torch and a plastic tube for the torch to light up. We've opted for the Shadowhawk Tactical X800 flashlight from Amazon for £23. It has adjustable power and strobe settings. We've also taped pink and blue plastic gels over the ends to create some coloured light. We also bought a 1 metre acrylic tube from eBay for around £8. We knew that the tube wouldn't light up that much if it were clear, so we wrapped some grease-proof paper around it to help diffuse the light better. We need our Canon 6D Mark II on a tripod, as I will be shooting some long exposures, and also a special remote control to open and close the shutter for long periods. The key to this shot is taking the photos around twilight and to find a location far from cities and any light pollution. After finding the right spot, you'll then want to be back at the location about an hour before twilight so you can get in position and dial in your camera settings and prepare your subject. We've used Live View to focus and compose our shot. Once you've composed your scene to frame your subject and the light painting that will surround it, set your Canon camera to B for bulb mode on the mode dial. For some Canon cameras, you'll need to use manual mode and adjust the shutter speed until it reads bulb just past 30 seconds. In bulb mode, your Canon will take an exposure for as long as you hold the shutter release button on the remote open. This way you can time your exposure with the wave of your light tube. Your aperture will need to be as wide as possible to let in as much light into your sensor. On our EF 16-35mm lens, that means f2.8. Your ISO will depend on how bright you want the scene and the surrounding light levels, but we used ISO 320. It would also depend on how long you're light painting, but our exposures varied from 4 to 40 seconds. Some torches have strobe and an SOS mode which will pulse the light at different times. Use this to make some cool stripy shapes. Remember, you don't have to stick to one shape. Wave around fluidly and keep it smooth for a slick looking effect. It takes a bit of practice, but it's worth it, we promise. So now we've made our 1980s style image, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jason, who's going to show you how to do the Photoshop editing.
So we're back at home on the computer and we need to load up our image into Photoshop. So click and drag that onto the Photoshop CC icon and it'll open our image. And the first thing we can see is that it looked really good, but a little bit dark in the center maybe and a little bit bright towards the outside. And also, if we zoom in here, we can also see that there's a car light in the distance that has come through the area where we've painted with our light rod. So actually it's a bit distracting, so we need to take that out. So head over to your tools and click and drag your cursor to the patch tool. And once you have the patch tool selected, what this is going to do is enable you to select the light there, just draw around that, and then take a patch from somewhere else and clone it over the top. So I'm just going to place it very close by around here to line up these swirly lines. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And then if we zoom back out, you can see that that's completely removed that little light spot. And the next thing we want to do is convert this image into a smart object, because we want to use Camera Raw to edit some of these sections. So if you head over to the Layers panel and right click on your image and go to Convert to Smart Object, your object is now a smart object, and that means you can head up to the top of the window, click on Filter and go to Camera Raw Filter. And this will open up in Camera Raw, much like you would find if you were editing a RAW or a DNG file. And it gives us all of the same options, so we can change exposure and contrast and highlights and whites and blacks, as well as clarity and all the other editing tools available to us in Camera Raw. And the first thing I want to do is lift the exposure here, because it's very slightly too dark. So I'm just going to lift the exposure, not too much, so that we don't blow out these highlights around the edges of the frame where the lights are. I'd say +3 looks pretty good. I also want to lift the overall shadows slightly, because it's a little bit too dark on the shadows. So I'm going to add about +15, maybe +20. Yeah, there we go. If you want to change the value without using the sliders, you can just highlight the number, type it in on your keyboard and hit enter or return. And also the colours look really good, but I want them to stand out a little bit more, so I'm just going to increase the vibrance, which you can see does wonders for the blues and the pinks that are a little bit more faded. So that looks good, but I'm not happy with how dark the centre of the frame is. I want the car and the model to stand out more. So what we can do is head up to the top left of this window and click on the radial filter. And what the radial filter does is it gives us the option of drawing exactly where we want our edits to fall. So if I create this little mask section here and reposition it, so clicking and dragging and repositioning, and what I do now is any edits I make will change the image around that selection, and you'll notice how it's changing the outside of the image. And actually what I want to do is brighten the inside. So if you head down to color, underneath color where it says effect, you can click outside or inside. So if I click inside, now that's going to affect everything inside the selection. And I head back up to exposure slider, and I think I'm going to increase it by about 1 stop, so it's a lot brighter in the center of the frame. Of course, if you want to control the mask, you can click on these transform controls on the edge of the mask, and you can change the shape slightly and click the center anchor point, and you can choose where in the picture it situates. So I'd say it's around here. Maybe I'll make it a little bit wider, just so the center of the frame is a little bit brighter, and I might bring it up slightly because I don't want the ground being too bright, because the main focus is on the car and the model here. And what I'm going to do is also I'm just going to lift the shadows slightly, but in doing so I've taken out some of the contrast in the darker areas of the car. I think that's a little bit too bright, so what I'm going to do is adjust the black slider just to add a little bit more contrast. So I've gone +20 on the shadows to lift the brighter shadows out, but -20 on the blacks just to keep the contrast there. So that's brighter and it's more contrasty, so it's standing out more. But I still want to do more to this because the edges of the frame are still very bright. So one way of doing this is to introduce a vignette, and you can do that by clicking new on the radial filter, and this will allow us to make a new selection with a new radial filter. So click in the center and drag out, and you'll see our previous settings are still in place, and we're doing the same job again really. So we need to go down and click outside. So now that's affecting everything outside of the selection, and I'm going to 0 these settings, and I want to make it darker, so I'm going to add -0.3, and you can see how that's darkened the edge of the frame, and that's great. So it's darkening the edge, so our eyes are naturally drawn to the center where it's brighter and more contrasty, where the car and the model is, and it looks a lot better now. And there's just one final tweak that I need to do to make this perfect. So I'm going to select the hand tool here, which is the keyboard shortcut H, and I'm just going to pump up the clarity slightly. Not by much, just maybe 5, plus 5, just to give an extra little bit of punch. And then I'm going to click OK, and you'll see that this Camera Raw filter is processing, and you can actually turn this on and off if you want to by clicking the eye icon in the layers palette there. And so this is a completely non-destructive way of working on your JPEG image, but still having all of the editing controls of Adobe Camera Raw. So that's pretty much it finished. So from here you can just save it as a JPEG or save it as a PSD if you want to work on it later. But that is our final finished 1980s retro style light painting portrait.